Marcus Caldwell raised his rifle to track the deer through the Montana wilderness, but the desperate cry echoing through the trees made him forget the hunt entirely. When he found the injured woman collapsed against an oak tree, clutching a mysterious brass key that powerful men would kill for, he had no idea that carrying her to safety would ignite a deadly conspiracy that would change both their lives forever. But would protecting her cost him everything he'd built in the untamed frontier? The crack of a breaking branch echoed through the Montana woods like a gunshot, and Marcus Caldwell froze mid-step. His breath came out in white puffs in the cold October air of 1867. Something was wrong. After 3 years of hunting these hills, he knew every sound the forest made. This wasn't normal. Marcus gripped his rifle tighter and crouched behind a thick pine tree. The morning frost made everything sparkle like tiny diamonds on the grass and leaves. He had woken up before sunrise, eager to track the big buck whose prints he'd found yesterday near Willow Creek. His cabin needed meat for the coming winter, and this deer would feed him for weeks. But now all thoughts of hunting vanished from his mind. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds chirped, no squirrels chattered. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Marcus had learned to trust these moments of stillness during his years living alone in the wilderness. They always meant danger was near. He moved carefully from tree to tree, his worn leather boots making no sound on the soft ground covered with fallen leaves. His wool coat caught on a low branch, and he had to stop to free himself. The scent of pine needles filled his nose, mixed with something else he couldn't quite place. Something that didn't belong in his peaceful woods. Marcus was 28 years old and had chosen this lonely life on purpose. After the war between the states ended 2 years ago, he'd had enough of crowds and noise and people telling him what to do. His little cabin sat in a clearing 15 miles from the growing town of Helena, and that was exactly how he liked it. He talked to his neighbors maybe once a month when he rode to town for supplies. The strange smell grew stronger as he moved deeper into the woods. It was metallic, sharp, and it made his stomach turn. He'd smelled it before during the war. It was the smell of blood. Marcus climbed a small hill covered with oak trees, their leaves turning gold and red in the autumn air. From the top, he could see for miles across the valley. The mountains rose up in the distance, their peaks already white with early snow. This was his favorite spot in the whole territory. He often came here just to think and watch the sun set behind the peaks. But today, something was different about his special place. At the bottom of the hill, near a cluster of rocks by the creek, he saw what had made the breaking sound. A large tree branch lay across the path, freshly broken. But branches didn't break by themselves on calm mornings like this. Someone or something had knocked it down. Marcus made his way down the hill, stepping carefully on the loose rocks. His heart was beating faster now, and his hands felt sweaty despite the cold air. He'd learned to listen to his instincts during the war. They'd kept him alive when other soldiers weren't so lucky. The broken branch was bigger than he'd thought. It would have taken considerable force to snap it from the tree. As he knelt to examine it, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There were scratches in the bark that looked like they'd been made by fingernails. Human fingernails. Someone had grabbed onto this branch while falling. Someone who was probably hurt and scared and still somewhere in these woods. Marcus stood up and looked around more carefully. Now he could see other signs he'd missed before. Footprints in the soft mud near the creek. A piece of torn fabric caught on a thorny bush. Small drops of dried blood on some of the rocks. The trail led deeper into the forest, toward the part of the woods where the trees grew so thick that sunlight barely reached the ground. It was the kind of place where a person could easily get lost and never find their way out. Marcus had explored every inch of these woods, but even he was careful in that area. He followed the trail for about half a mile, moving quietly and watching for any movement. The signs were easy to read once he knew what to look for. Someone had stumbled through here recently, probably during the night. They were hurt and moving slowly, stopping often to rest. The person had tried to cover their tracks a few times, kicking leaves over their footprints and choosing the rocky parts of the stream to walk in. This told Marcus that whoever it was knew something about hiding from people who might be following them. That meant they were probably running from something dangerous. As he got closer to the dark part of the forest, Marcus heard a new sound that made him stop completely. It was so quiet he almost missed it. But there it was again, the sound of someone crying. Not the loud crying of a child who'd fallen down and scraped their knee. This was the soft, hopeless crying of someone who was trying very hard not to make any noise. Someone who was afraid that making sound might bring terrible danger. Marcus felt his chest tighten with an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time. During his years alone in the cabin, he'd gotten used to not caring about other people's problems. It was easier that way, safer. But hearing that quiet crying stirred something deep inside him that he'd thought was dead and buried. He checked his rifle to make sure it was loaded and ready. Then he took a deep breath of the cold morning air and stepped into the shadows of the deep woods, following the sound of someone's pain toward whatever was waiting for him in the darkness ahead. "Please, somebody help me." The voice was so weak that Marcus almost missed it completely. It drifted through the trees like smoke, barely louder than the whisper of wind through the pine needles. He stopped walking and held his breath, listening with every bit of his attention. There it was again, a woman's voice, coming from somewhere ahead in the darkest part of the forest where the big oak trees blocked out most of the sky. She sounded hurt and scared and so tired that Marcus wondered how long she'd been out here alone. He moved toward the voice, pushing through bushes and stepping over fallen logs. The thorns caught at his coat and scratched his hands, but he barely noticed. Something inside his chest was pulling him forward, something stronger than curiosity or even kindness. It felt like the most important thing he'd ever done in his life. The woman was sitting with her back against the biggest oak tree Marcus had ever seen. Its trunk was so wide that it would take 4 men holding hands to reach around it. The tree was probably older than the whole Montana territory, maybe older than America itself. But Marcus barely noticed the tree. All his attention was on the woman leaning against it. Her dark brown hair hung loose around her shoulders, tangled with bits of leaves and twigs. Her dress had once been a pretty blue color, but now it was torn and dirty and stained with mud and something darker that Marcus realized was blood. Her face was pale as fresh snow, and there was a cut across her forehead that had bled and then dried. But it was her eyes that hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. They were green as spring grass, and they looked at him with a mixture of hope and terror that made his hands shake. "Don't hurt me," she whispered, trying to push herself further back against the tree. "Please, I don't have anything left to take." Marcus quickly set his rifle down against a nearby tree and held up both hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you, miss. My name is Marcus Caldwell. I live about 2 miles from here." The woman stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether she could trust him. Marcus could see that her left leg was bent at a strange angle, and the way she held her right arm against her body told him she had other injuries too. "What's your name?" Marcus asked gently, kneeling down a few feet away from her so he wouldn't seem scary. "Catherine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Catherine Brennan. I think my leg might be broken." Marcus could see that she was right. Her ankle was swollen to twice its normal size, and there was definitely something wrong with the way her leg was positioned. She also had cuts and bruises on her arms, and the way she was breathing told him that her ribs might be hurt too. "What happened to you, Miss Brennan?" Marcus asked, though he was already starting to guess the answer. Catherine's green eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back with the kind of strength that told Marcus she'd been through something terrible and was determined to survive it. "The stagecoach," she said. "Yesterday evening, just before dark. We were traveling from Bozeman to Helena when men on horses came out of the trees. They had guns and masks over their faces." Marcus felt anger rise up in his chest like a hot fire. Stage robberies had been getting more common as word spread about gold being found in the Montana hills. But most robbers just took money and valuables and let the passengers go. Something about Catherine's injuries told him this had been different. "How many were there?" he asked. 5, maybe 6. They made everyone get out of the coach and line up beside the road. The driver tried to reach for his shotgun, and they shot him. Catherine's voice broke on the last words. Marcus saw her whole body start to shake, and he realized she was probably in shock as well as being hurt. He needed to get her warm and safe as quickly as possible. "What happened next?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "They started going through everyone's belongings. But they seemed to be looking for something specific. They kept asking if anyone was carrying papers or documents. When people said no, the robbers got angry." Catherine paused and took a shaky breath. "There was a man traveling with his wife. An older couple. The robbers seemed to recognize them, and they got very excited. They started asking about some kind of key." Marcus felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. This wasn't sounding like an ordinary robbery at all. The old man said he didn't know what they were talking about, but the robbers didn't believe him. They started threatening his wife, and that's when the shooting began. "I ran into the woods as fast as I could." "How long have you been out here?" Marcus asked. "All night. I kept walking, trying to find help or at least get to the main road. But I got lost, and then I fell down a steep slope in the dark. That's when I hurt my leg." Marcus looked up at the sky. The sun was getting higher, which meant it was probably around 9 in the morning. Catherine had been wandering around the forest for almost 12 hours, hurt and scared and alone. The fact that she was still alive showed incredible strength. "Miss Brennan," Marcus said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. Do you know what those robbers were really looking for?" Catherine looked away from him, and Marcus could tell she was trying to decide how much to trust him. After a moment, she reached into the torn pocket of her dress and pulled out something small and shiny. It was a brass key, old and worn, the kind that might open a safe or a strongbox. Catherine held it in her palm like it was made of gold. "I found this in the coach after everyone ran away," she said quietly. "It must have fallen out of someone's bag during the robbery. I thought it might be important, so I took it." Marcus stared at the key, and suddenly everything made sense. The robbers hadn't been after money or jewelry. They'd been hired to find this key, and they'd been willing to kill for it, which meant that Catherine was still in terrible danger. "Miss Brennan," Marcus said, standing up and reaching for his rifle. "We need to get you out of here right now. If those men figure out that you have what they're looking for, they'll come after you." As if his words had summoned them from thin air, Marcus heard the sound of horses moving through the forest, still distant but getting closer. The riders were moving slowly and carefully, like they were following a trail. Catherine heard them too, and her face went white with terror. "They found me," she whispered. Marcus made the most important decision of his life in that moment. He scooped Catherine up in his arms, feeling how light she was despite being a grown woman. She cried out once as the movement jarred her broken leg, then bit her lip to keep from making more noise. "Hold on tight," Marcus told her, and started running through the forest toward his cabin, carrying his future in his arms while the sound of pursuing horses grew louder behind them. The cabin door slammed shut behind them with a bang that echoed through the small room like thunder. Marcus set Catherine down gently on his bed, the only real furniture he owned besides a wooden table and 2 chairs he'd built with his own hands. She was breathing hard and trying not to cry from the pain of being carried so quickly through the rough forest. Marcus rushed to the window and peered through the glass, searching the tree line for any sign of the riders they'd heard. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. The cabin suddenly felt very small and very alone, sitting in its clearing with nothing but open space between it and the woods where dangerous men might be hiding. "Are they following us?" Catherine asked, her voice shaking. "I don't see them yet," Marcus said, but he didn't move away from the window. "We got a good head start, but they'll find this place eventually. Tracking isn't hard when you know what you're doing." The cabin had been Marcus's safe place for 3 years. He'd built it himself, choosing this spot because it was hidden from the main road but close enough to the creek for fresh water. The walls were made of thick logs that would stop most bullets, and he'd designed it so he could see anyone approaching from any direction. But now, looking at it through the eyes of a man who needed to protect someone else, Marcus realized how vulnerable it really was. There was only 1 door and 2 windows. If men surrounded the cabin, there would be no way to escape. "Miss Brennan," Marcus said, turning away from the window, "I need to look at your injuries. We can't run anymore with your leg hurt like that, so we need to get you fixed up as best we can." Catherine nodded, but Marcus could see the fear in her green eyes. She was trying to be brave, but she was just a young woman who'd been through a terrible experience. Most people would have given up by now, but she kept fighting. Marcus knelt beside the bed and carefully examined her swollen ankle. He'd learned some basic doctoring during the war, when army doctors were too busy to treat every wounded soldier. The ankle was definitely broken, but it was a clean break that would heal if it was set properly. "This is going to hurt," Marcus warned her as he gently straightened her leg. Catherine bit down on a piece of leather from Marcus's belt to keep from screaming. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she didn't make a sound as Marcus used strips of wood and cloth to make a splint for her ankle. "You're braver than most men I served with in the army," Marcus told her as he finished binding the splint. "I don't feel brave," Catherine whispered. "I feel scared and lost and like I'm going to get you killed just for being kind to me." Marcus looked at her face, really looked at it for the first time since he'd found her. Even hurt and frightened, there was something special about Catherine Brennan. Her eyes held intelligence and strength, and the way she spoke told him she'd had more education than most frontier women. "Where are you from originally?" Marcus asked as he cleaned the cut on her forehead with water from his washbasin. "Boston," Catherine said. "My father was a lawyer there, but he died last year, and I came west to live with my aunt in Helena." Marcus noticed how she hesitated when talking about her father. There was something she wasn't telling him, but he didn't push. Everyone in the Montana Territory had secrets they'd left behind. "What about you?" Catherine asked. "Have you always lived out here alone?" "3 years now," Marcus said, wrapping a clean bandage around her head. "I came west after the war ended. I'd had enough of being around people for a while." "The war must have been terrible," Catherine said softly. Marcus was quiet for a moment, remembering things he tried not to think about. "War changes a man, makes you see things differently. I thought I wanted to be alone forever." "Thought?" Catherine asked, catching the past tense. Before Marcus could answer, he heard something that made his blood turn to ice. The distant sound of horses moving through the trees around his cabin. The riders had found them. Marcus grabbed his rifle and moved back to the window. Through the glass, he could see movement in the shadows between the trees. At least 3 men, maybe more, were positioning themselves around the clearing. "They're here," Marcus said quietly. Catherine tried to sit up straighter on the bed, wincing as the movement hurt her ribs. "What do we do?" Marcus checked his rifle to make sure it was loaded, then looked around the cabin for anything else they could use as weapons. He had a pistol in a drawer and a hunting knife on the table. Not much against several armed men, but it would have to do. "The key," Marcus said suddenly. "That's what they really want. If we give it to them, maybe they'll leave us alone." Catherine's hand went to her dress pocket where she'd hidden the brass key. What if it's something important? What if giving it to them helps them hurt other people? It was a good question, and Marcus realized that Catherine was thinking about more than just their own safety. Even scared and hurt, she was worried about doing the right thing. "Hello in the cabin," a voice called from outside. It was a man's voice, rough and confident. "We know you're in there. We just want to talk." Marcus didn't believe that for a second. Men who just wanted to talk didn't surround a cabin with guns drawn. "What do you want?" Marcus called back, staying away from the windows. "You've got something that belongs to us," the voice said. "A little brass key that fell out of a coach yesterday. Hand it over, and nobody needs to get hurt." Marcus looked at Catherine, who was clutching the key so tightly her knuckles were white. "It's your choice," he told her quietly. "But whatever you decide, I'll stand by you." Catherine stared at him with those remarkable green eyes, and Marcus could see her thinking hard about something. Finally, she spoke in a voice that was stronger than before. "The key wasn't in the coach by accident," she said. "It was hidden there on purpose by someone who knew those robbers were coming. Someone wanted to make sure this key got to Helena safely." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "You think the whole robbery was planned around this key?" "I think my father didn't die in an accident like I was told," Catherine said, her voice growing harder. "And I think this key is the reason why." Outside, the The voice was getting impatient. "We're done talking, folks. You've got 1 minute to send out the girl and the key, or we're coming in with guns blazing." Marcus looked at Catherine, at this brave young woman who'd already lost so much and was still willing to fight for what was right. He'd spent 3 years running away from the world, but maybe it was time to stand and fight for something that mattered. "Well, Miss Brennan," Marcus said, checking his rifle one more time, "I guess we're about to find out what that key opens." Catherine's hands were shaking as she pulled the brass key from her pocket, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "My real name isn't Catherine Brennan," she said, looking directly into Marcus's eyes. "It's Catherine Morrison. My father was Judge William Morrison, and 3 weeks ago, someone murdered him to get this key." Marcus felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. Judge Morrison was one of the most powerful men in the Montana Territory, known for fighting corruption in the territorial government. His death had been reported as a heart attack, but if Catherine was telling the truth, it had been cold-blooded murder. "Why didn't you tell me before?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't angry. In the territory, people kept secrets for good reasons. "Because Judge Morrison's daughter would be worth a fortune in ransom money," Catherine said. "And because I wasn't sure I could trust you. But you've risked your life for a stranger, so I think you deserve the truth." Outside, Marcus could hear the men getting into position around the cabin. There were definitely more than 3 of them now. He could count at least 5 different voices as they called quietly to each other. "What does the key open?" Marcus asked. "A safe deposit box at the Helena Bank," Catherine said. "My father told me it contained evidence that would expose a conspiracy involving territorial officials and mining companies. Someone has been stealing land from settlers and selling it to big Eastern companies for huge profits." Marcus nodded grimly. He'd heard rumors about such things, but like most people, he'd figured it was just frontier gossip. Now it seemed the rumors were true, and men were willing to kill to keep their crimes secret. "Your father was investigating this conspiracy?" Marcus asked. "For months. He said he was close to having enough evidence to arrest some very important people. That's why he hid the key on the stagecoach. He knew someone might try to stop him from getting to Helena." A new voice called from outside, different from the first one. This voice was educated and smooth, the kind that belonged to a man used to giving orders. "Miss Morrison," the voice said, "my name is Robert Fairfax. I'm an attorney representing certain business interests in the territory. I believe you have something that belongs to my clients." Marcus recognized the name. Fairfax was a lawyer who worked for the big mining companies, a man who'd gotten rich helping Eastern businessmen take over Western land. "I don't have anything that belongs to you," Catherine called back, her voice stronger than Marcus had heard it yet. "I'm afraid you do, my dear," Fairfax said, his tone becoming less friendly. "Your father took something that wasn't his to take. We're simply here to retrieve stolen property." "My father was an honest judge," Catherine said, standing up despite her injured leg. "He never stole anything in his life." Marcus helped steady her as she moved to the window. He could see Fairfax now, a well-dressed man sitting on a fine horse at the edge of the clearing. He looked completely out of place in the rough frontier setting, like a banker who'd wandered into a buffalo hunt. "Your father was a meddling fool who didn't understand how business works in the territory," Fairfax said, all pretense of politeness gone. "He interfered with legitimate business deals and cost my clients a great deal of money." "Legitimate?" Catherine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean stealing land from families and selling it to companies back east? You mean bribing territorial officials and forging legal documents?" Marcus could see that Fairfax was getting angry. The lawyer's face was turning red, and his horse was dancing nervously under him. "Enough talk," Fairfax said. "Bring me that key, or my men will come in and take it from your dead bodies." Marcus had heard enough. He opened the cabin door and stepped outside, his rifle ready in his hands. Catherine tried to follow him, but he motioned for her to stay inside where she'd be safer. "Mr. Fairfax," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the clearing, "I think you and your men should leave now. You're trespassing on my land." Fairfax laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Your land? Mr. Caldwell, according to our records, this property was never legally filed, which means it belongs to whoever has the strongest claim. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He'd been so focused on building his cabin and living his quiet life that he'd never bothered with the legal paperwork to officially claim his homestead. In the rough and tumble world of the territory, most people figured possession was enough. That's right, Fairfax continued, seeing Marcus's expression change. This land has already been sold to one of my clients. You're nothing but a squatter, and squatters have no rights under territorial law. But I've been living here for 3 years, Marcus said, though he could hear how weak his argument sounded. Living here illegally, Fairfax corrected. My client has been very patient, but patience has limits. We were planning to remove you next month anyway. This just moves up our timeline. Marcus realized with growing horror that this whole situation was even worse than he'd thought. Not only were these men after Catherine and the key, but they were also planning to steal his land. Everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for, was about to disappear. However, Fairfax said, his voice becoming smooth again, I'm prepared to make you a deal. Give us the girl and the key, and we'll allow you to stay on this land as a tenant. You can keep your cabin and work for my client as a caretaker. The offer hit Marcus like a slap in the face. They wanted him to betray Catherine and become a servant on his own land. They wanted to turn him into the kind of man who looked the other way while powerful people destroyed the lives of honest folks. Marcus thought about his years in the war, fighting to preserve the Union and protect the rights of ordinary people. He thought about why he'd come west in the first place, to build something honest and good in a place where a man's worth was measured by his character, not his bank account. Mr. Fairfax, Marcus said, raising his rifle to his shoulder. I've got a counteroffer for you. Get off my land right now, or I'll start shooting. Fairfax's face went pale with rage. You fool! Do you have any idea who you're threatening? I have connections in Washington. I can destroy you with a single telegram. Maybe so, Marcus said, taking aim at Fairfax's chest. But you'll be too dead to send it. For a long moment, the clearing was absolutely silent. Even the birds seemed to be holding their breath. Then Fairfax smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. Very well, Mr. Caldwell. You've made your choice. Men take the cabin. Kill the man, but bring me the girl and the key. As Fairfax spurred his horse back into the trees, Marcus heard the sound that would haunt his dreams, the metallic click of gun hammers being pulled back to firing position. He dove back through the cabin door just as the first shots shattered the morning air. Bullets splintered the wooden door frame just inches from Marcus's head as he dove back into the cabin. The thick log walls shook with the impact of rifle shots, and glass exploded from one of the windows as Catherine screamed and dropped to the floor beside the bed. Stay down, Marcus shouted, crawling across the cabin floor to where his pistol lay in the wooden chest by the fireplace. Outside, he could hear Fairfax's men spreading out around the clearing, their boots crunching on the fallen leaves as they found positions behind trees and rocks. The cabin that had been Marcus's peaceful home for 3 years had suddenly become a fortress under attack. Every board, every nail, every carefully chosen log would now determine whether they lived or died in the next few minutes. Catherine was pressing herself against the wall beneath the broken window, her face pale but determined. Blood was running down her arm from where a piece of flying glass had cut her, but she was holding Marcus's hunting knife in her good hand. How many bullets do you have? She asked, her voice surprisingly calm. Marcus checked his rifle and pistol, then looked in his ammunition box. Maybe 20 shots total. Not nearly enough if they decide to wait us out. A new voice called from outside, younger and rougher than Fairfax's smooth tone. Hey, old man, you can't hide in there forever. We got all day, and you got nowhere to run. Through the remaining window, Marcus could see movement in the trees. These weren't just random outlaws hired for a quick job. They moved like soldiers, taking cover and communicating with hand signals. Someone had trained them well. Catherine, Marcus said quietly, there's something I need to tell you about your father's investigation. She looked at him with surprise. You knew my father? Not personally, but I knew about his work. Before I came here, I worked for the territorial government in Virginia City. I was a clerk in the land office, and I saw things that didn't make sense. Documents that were changed after they were filed. Surveys that showed different boundaries than the originals. Marcus moved to the other window and carefully peered out. He could see at least 4 men positioned around the cabin, which meant there were probably more he couldn't see. I tried to report what I'd found to my supervisor, Marcus continued, but he told me to mind my own business, said that asking too many questions could be dangerous for a man's health. That's part of why I came out here to live alone. Catherine stared at him with growing understanding. You have evidence too. That's why they want this land. You've seen proof of what they're doing. Before Marcus could answer, something came crashing through the broken window. It was a burning stick from someone's campfire, wrapped with oil-soaked cloth. The makeshift torch landed on Marcus's wooden table and immediately set it ablaze. They're trying to burn us out, Catherine cried. Marcus grabbed a bucket of water he kept by the door and threw it on the flames, but the fire had already spread to some papers and clothes nearby. Smoke began filling the small cabin, making it hard to breathe and see. Another torch came through the other window, this one landing on Marcus's bed. Catherine had to roll away quickly to avoid being burned, crying out as the movement jarred her broken leg. We can't stay here, Marcus said, coughing from the smoke. They'll roast us alive. But as he moved toward the door, bullets immediately started hitting the wood around it. Fairfax's men were watching every exit, waiting for them to run out into the open where they could be shot down easily. The fire was spreading quickly now, fed by the dry wood and the wind coming through the broken windows. Marcus realized they had maybe 5 minutes before the whole cabin would be in flames. There's a root cellar, Marcus said suddenly, remembering the storage space he dug beneath the cabin floor. It connects to a tunnel that leads to the creek. I built it in case I ever needed to hide supplies from raiders. Catherine's eyes lit up with hope. Can we get to it? Marcus pulled up a loose floorboard near the fireplace, revealing a narrow opening that led down into darkness. It's going to be tight, and with your leg. I can do it, Catherine said firmly. I have to. The smoke was getting thicker, and Marcus could hear the men outside getting excited as they saw flames starting to show through the windows. They thought they'd won, that their prey would be forced out into the open where they could be captured or killed. Marcus helped Catherine down into the root cellar first, then grabbed his rifle and the ammunition box. As he started to follow her down, he heard Fairfax's voice calling from outside. Caldwell, I can see the smoke from here. You've got about 2 minutes before that cabin comes down around your ears. Send out the girl now, and I might let you live. Marcus didn't bother answering. Instead, he dropped through the floor opening and pulled the loose board back into place above him. The root cellar was dark and cramped, barely tall enough for him to crouch, but it was their only chance. Catherine was already crawling toward the far end where Marcus had dug a tunnel that led to the creek bank 50 yards away. The tunnel was even smaller than the cellar, just wide enough for one person to squeeze through on hands and knees. Can you make it with your leg? Marcus whispered. I'll make it, Catherine said, and started crawling into the tunnel. Above them, Marcus could hear the crackling of flames and the excited voices of Fairfax's men as they realized their targets weren't coming out of the burning cabin. Soon they would investigate and discover the root cellar, but hopefully not before he and Catherine could escape through the tunnel. The tunnel was pitch black and smelled of damp earth and old roots. Marcus crawled behind Catherine, listening to her struggle with her injured leg but never complaining. Water was dripping from somewhere above, and the walls seemed to press in on them from all sides. After what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes, they saw light ahead. The tunnel ended at the creek bank, hidden by overhanging bushes and rocks. Catherine emerged first, gasping with pain and exhaustion, followed by Marcus. They were 50 yards from the cabin, which was now completely engulfed in flames. Marcus watched 3 years of his life burning to the ground and felt something die inside his chest. Everything he'd built, every possession he owned except his rifle and the clothes on his back, was turning to ash. But then he looked at Catherine, brave and determined despite everything she'd been through, and realized that maybe what he'd lost wasn't as important as what he'd found. "Where do we go now?" Catherine asked, wincing as she tried to put weight on her injured leg. Marcus looked around at the forest that had been his home, then at the burning cabin where Fairfax's men were probably just discovering their escape. They would be tracked again soon, but now they had a head start. "Helena," Marcus said, helping Catherine to her feet. "We take that key to someone who can use it to stop these men once and for all." But as they started moving through the trees toward the main road, Marcus heard something that made his blood freeze. The sound of dogs barking in the distance, getting closer. Fairfax had brought tracking hounds. The baying of the hounds echoed through the forest like the voices of demons, growing louder with each passing minute. Marcus helped Catherine limp through the thick underbrush, but he knew they couldn't outrun dogs, especially with her broken legs slowing them down. "How far to the main road?" Catherine asked, breathing hard from the effort of walking on her injured ankle. "About 3 miles, Marcus said, looking back through the trees where he could see smoke still rising from his burned cabin. "But the dogs will catch us long before we get there." They had been moving for nearly an hour, following game trails and creek beds to try to hide their scent. But Marcus knew that tracking hounds were nearly impossible to fool, especially when they had a fresh trail to follow. The forest around them was changing as they moved further from Marcus's homestead. The trees here were taller and older, with thick trunks that blocked out most of the sunlight. Moss covered the rocks and fallen logs, making everything slippery and dangerous for someone with a broken leg. "Tell me about the people we're taking the key to," Catherine said, clearly trying to keep her mind off the approaching danger. "How do we know they'll help us instead of just taking it for themselves?" Marcus had been wondering the same thing. In the Montana Territory, it was hard to know who could be trusted. Men who seemed honest during the day sometimes turned out to be in league with crooked politicians and business interests. "There's a federal marshal in Helena named John Patterson," Marcus said. "He came out from Washington last year to investigate complaints about territorial corruption. Word is that he's honest and not afraid to go after powerful men." "Word is?" Catherine asked, catching the uncertainty in his voice. "I've never met him personally," Marcus admitted, "but he's the only lawman in the territory who doesn't owe his job to the local political machine." The sound of the dogs was getting closer now, maybe only a quarter-mile behind them. Marcus could also hear the voices of men calling to each other as they followed the trail. Fairfax wasn't giving up easily. They came to a place where the creek they'd been following split into 2 branches. Marcus stopped, studying the ground and thinking hard about their options. "If we go left, the trail leads toward the main road," he said. "But it's open ground for the last mile with nowhere to hide. If we go right, it leads up into the mountains where there are caves and rocky areas that might confuse the dogs." "But going right takes us away from Helena," Catherine pointed out. "Yes, but it might keep us alive long enough to find another way to get there." Catherine was quiet for a moment, thinking. Despite everything she'd been through, her mind was still sharp and clear. "What if we split up?" she said finally. Marcus looked at her in shock. "What do you mean?" "You take the key and go toward Helena. I'll go up into the mountains and try to draw the dogs after me. That way, at least one of us might make it." "Absolutely not," Marcus said firmly. "I'm not leaving you alone out here with a broken leg and armed men chasing you." "But it makes sense," Catherine argued. "The key is what's really important. If you can get it to Marshal Patterson, you can stop these men from stealing more land and hurting more people." Marcus stared at her, amazed by her courage and her willingness to sacrifice herself for the greater good. But he also realized something that surprised him. Somewhere during their time together, Catherine Morrison had become more important to him than his own life. "We stay together," he said. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Before Catherine could argue further, the sound of barking suddenly got much louder. The dogs had reached the place where the creek split, and Marcus could hear men's voices arguing about which way to go. "They're close," Catherine whispered. Marcus made a quick decision. "This way," he said, helping her toward the right branch that led up into the mountains. There's a place I know about 2 miles up the creek. A box canyon with caves where we might be able to hide. They moved as quickly as Catherine's leg would allow, splashing through the shallow water to help hide their scent. The creek bottom was rocky and uneven, making every step painful for Catherine, but she never complained. Behind them, Marcus could hear the dogs getting excited as they picked up the trail again. The men had decided to follow the mountain path, which meant they would be caught within the hour unless they found a good hiding place. The creek led them up a steep slope where the water tumbled over rocks and fallen logs. Catherine had to use her hands to help pull herself up the steeper parts, and Marcus could see that she was reaching the end of her strength. "Just a little further," he encouraged her. "The canyon is just around that bend." But when they rounded the bend, Marcus's heart sank. The box canyon he remembered was there, but it wasn't empty. A thin column of smoke was rising from near the back wall, and he could see horses tied to trees near a small campsite. "Someone's already here," Catherine said, stating the obvious. Marcus was about to suggest they try to circle around the canyon when a figure stepped out from behind a large boulder. It was a man in his 50s with graying hair and a thick beard. He was holding a rifle, but he didn't point it at them. "You two look like you're in a hurry," the man said, his voice calm and measured. "And unless I'm mistaken, those are tracking dogs I hear coming up the creek." Marcus kept his own rifle ready but didn't aim it at the stranger. "We don't want any trouble, mister. We're just passing through." The man studied them for a moment, taking in Catherine's torn dress and injured leg, and Marcus's worried expression. "Name's Tom Bradley," he said finally. "I'm a prospector. Been working claims up here for the past month." "I'm Marcus Caldwell, and this is Catherine Morrison," Marcus said, deciding that honesty might be their best option. Bradley's eyebrows went up at the mention of Catherine's name. "Morrison? Any relation to Judge Morrison, who died a few weeks back?" "He was my father," Catherine said quietly. Bradley nodded slowly, his expression becoming more serious. "Heard tell that the judge was investigating some mighty powerful people before he died. Also heard tell that his death might not have been as natural as folks were told." Marcus felt a spark of hope. "You seem to know a lot about territorial politics for a prospector." Bradley smiled grimly. "A man hears things when he's camped up in the mountains. Voices carry a long way on clear nights, and some very interesting conversations happen around campfires when men think nobody's listening." The sound of the dogs was getting much closer now. Marcus estimated they had maybe 10 minutes before Fairfax's men reached the canyon. "Mr. Bradley," Marcus said urgently, "we have evidence that could expose the corruption that killed Judge Morrison, but we need to get to Helena to turn it over to Marshal Patterson." Bradley looked from Marcus to Catherine, then back at Marcus. "And I'm guessing those dogs belong to the same men who killed the judge?" "Among others," Catherine said. "They're led by a lawyer named Robert Fairfax." Bradley's face darkened with anger. "Fairfax," he spat. "That snake has been trying to steal mining claims all over this territory. Had some of his men try to run me off my claim just last week." Marcus felt his hope growing stronger. "Will you help us?" Bradley was quiet for a moment, listening to the approaching dogs. Then he smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "Son," he said, "I've been waiting for a chance to pay back Mr. Fairfax for quite some time. I think you just gave me the perfect opportunity." The explosion that rocked the canyon came without warning, sending rocks and dirt raining down from the cliffs above like a deadly hailstorm. Tom Bradley grinned as he watched the avalanche he triggered with dynamite completely block the narrow entrance to the canyon, trapping Fairfax's men and their dogs on the other side of tons of fallen stone. "That should keep them busy for a while," Bradley said, dusting off his hands as the echoes died away. "I've been saving that dynamite for a special occasion." Marcus stared at the pile of rocks that now sealed the canyon entrance. "How did you know exactly where to place the charges?" "I've been a miner for 30 years, son. You learn to read rock formations like other men read books." Bradley shouldered his pack and picked up his rifle. "But that avalanche won't stop them forever. They'll find another way around within a few hours." Catherine was sitting on a fallen log, trying to rest her injured leg. The constant walking and climbing had taken a heavy toll on her, and Marcus could see exhaustion written across her pale face. "There's something I need to tell you both," Bradley said, his expression becoming serious. "I haven't been completely honest about why I'm up here in these mountains." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. In the territory, when someone said they hadn't been honest, it usually meant trouble was coming. "I'm not just a prospector," Bradley continued. "I work for the federal government. The Department of Interior sent me here 6 months ago to investigate illegal land seizures in the Montana Territory." Catherine looked up with sudden hope in her green eyes. "You're a federal agent?" "Not exactly. I'm what you might call a special investigator. The government has been getting reports about corruption out here, but every time they send official agents, the evidence disappears and witnesses refuse to talk." Marcus understood immediately. So they sent someone who could blend in with the regular miners and prospectors. Someone who could investigate without anyone knowing about it. Exactly. And in 6 months, I've gathered enough evidence to put half the territorial government in federal prison. The only problem is getting that evidence safely to Washington. Bradley reached into his pack and pulled out a thick leather folder stuffed with papers. Survey documents, forged deeds, bank records, letters between territorial officials and Eastern business interests. Everything needed to prove that there's been a massive conspiracy to steal land from honest settlers. "But you haven't been able to get the evidence out of the territory," Catherine said, understanding the problem. "Every time I try to leave, something happens. My horse goes lame, or I get sick, or there's some other delay. I think Fairfax's people have been watching me, even though they don't know exactly who I am." Marcus looked from Bradley to the pile of rocks blocking the canyon entrance, then back again. "But now you have an excuse to leave. You were trapped in the canyon and had to escape over the mountains." "That's right. And with Judge Morrison's daughter and the key she's carrying, we have even more evidence to present to the authorities." For the first time since finding Catherine in the forest, Marcus began to feel like they might actually have a chance of success. But Bradley's next words brought him back to reality. "The problem is getting to Helena alive. Fairfax has men watching all the roads, and word is he's put $1,000 bounty on Miss Morrison's head." Catherine went pale. $1,000? That's more money than most people in the territory see in 5 years. Which means every outlaw, drifter, and desperate man within 100 miles will be looking for you, Bradley said grimly. "We can't just walk into Helena and expect to make it to the marshal's office." Marcus studied the map Bradley had drawn in the dirt with a stick. It showed the mountains around them, the main roads to Helena, and several smaller trails that might be safer but would take much longer. "What about going north to Fort Shaw?" Marcus suggested. "The army post there has a telegraph. We could wire Washington directly." Bradley shook his head. "Fort Shaw is over 100 miles through hostile territory. And besides, the post commander there is Colonel Mitchell, who's been getting rich off contracts with the same companies we're trying to expose." "So Helena is our only option," Catherine said. "It's our best option," Bradley corrected. "But we're going to have to be very clever about how we get there." From beyond the pile of rocks, they could hear muffled voices and the sound of men trying to dig through the avalanche. Fairfax's people were already working to clear a path, which meant their head start was limited. "There's a mining town called Silver Creek about 15 miles north of here," Bradley said. "It's got a stagecoach that runs to Helena twice a week. If we can get there and blend in with the other passengers, we might be able to reach Helena without being recognized." Marcus looked at Catherine's torn dress and injured leg. "She's not exactly going to blend in looking like she's been through a fight." "I've thought of that too," Bradley said, pulling some clothes from his pack. "My late wife was about Miss Morrison's size. These should help her look like a proper lady traveler instead of a fugitive." Catherine accepted the clothes gratefully, but Marcus could see worry in her eyes. "What if Fairfax has men watching the stagecoach?" "He probably does," Bradley admitted, "but it's still our best chance. The alternative is trying to walk to Helena cross-country, and in your condition that would take weeks." They could hear the voices beyond the rockfall getting louder and more urgent. Someone was shouting orders, and Marcus thought he recognized Fairfax's smooth voice among them. "We need to move," Bradley said, shouldering his pack. "There's a trail that leads up to the ridge. From there, we can drop down into the Silver Creek Valley." As they started climbing out of the canyon, Catherine suddenly stopped and grabbed Marcus's arm. "Wait," she said. "There's something else about the key that I haven't told you." Marcus felt his heart skip. "What do you mean?" "It doesn't just open a safe deposit box at the Helena Bank," Catherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "According to my father's notes, it opens a specific box that contains something much more dangerous than just evidence of land fraud." Bradley had stopped climbing and was listening intently. "What kind of something?" Catherine reached into her dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper along with the brass key. "My father wrote this note the night before he died. He said the safe deposit box contains a list of names, federal officials in Washington who are part of the conspiracy." Marcus felt like the ground had dropped out from under him. "You mean this goes all the way to the federal government? Senators, congressmen, maybe even people in the president's administration," Catherine said. "My father believed that the land theft in Montana Territory was just one part of a much larger scheme involving Western territories all across the country." Bradley let out a low whistle. "No wonder they killed him, and no wonder they're willing to burn down half the territory to get that key back." The voices from the canyon were getting closer, which meant Fairfax's men had made more progress clearing the rockfall than expected. But now Marcus understood why this was about much more than just their personal survival. "If what your father discovered is true," Marcus said slowly, "then getting this evidence to the right people could change the entire future of the Western Territories. Or get us all killed trying," Bradley added grimly. Catherine looked from one man to the other, then carefully folded the note and put it back in her dress along with the key. "Then we better make sure we don't get killed," she said, and started climbing up the trail toward the ridge. As they climbed higher into the mountains, with the sound of pursuit growing louder behind them, Marcus realized that their simple escape had become something much bigger and more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The mining town of Silver Creek sat in a valley like a collection of wooden boxes someone had scattered carelessly across the landscape. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and Marcus could hear the distant sound of hammers and saws as the town continued to grow around the silver mine that had created it. "Remember," Tom Bradley said as they approached the outskirts of town, "we're just 3 travelers who met on the trail. Marcus, you're a ranch hand looking for work. Catherine, you're a schoolteacher traveling to Helena to take a position there. I'm a prospector heading to town for supplies." Catherine looked much different now in the clean dress Bradley had given her. With her hair pinned up properly and her face washed, she looked like the educated lady she really was instead of a fugitive who'd been running through the forest. "What if someone recognizes me?" Catherine asked. "Judge Morrison's daughter has been to Helena many times for social events. Keep your head down and speak as little as possible," Bradley advised. "Most people see what they expect to see. They'll expect to see a schoolteacher, so that's what they'll see." The town was busier than Marcus had expected. Silver Creek had grown from a mining camp to a real community in just 2 years, with a hotel, several stores, a saloon, and even a small church. People moved purposefully along the muddy main street, and Marcus could see several well-dressed strangers who looked like they might be business investors from back east. "There's the stagecoach office," Bradley said, pointing to a wooden building with a painted sign. "The Helena stage leaves at 2 o'clock, which gives us about 3 hours to wait." 3 hours felt like 3 years when every person they passed might recognize Catherine or might be working for Fairfax. Marcus tried to look casual as he scanned the faces around them, but his hand never moved far from his pistol. They bought their tickets from a bored-looking clerk who barely glanced at them. The stage fare to Helena was expensive, almost 2 weeks' wages for a working man, but Bradley paid without complaint. "Now we wait," Bradley said, "but not together. Catherine, you go to the hotel restaurant and order lunch. Sit by the window where you can watch the street. Marcus, you check out the saloon and listen for any talk about strangers in town. I'll browse the general store and see what I can learn." The saloon was dim and smoky, filled with miners who'd finished their morning shift and cowboys taking a break from driving cattle to market. Marcus ordered a beer and found a spot at the bar where he could listen to conversations without seeming to pay attention. Most of the talk was about ordinary things, the weather, the price of silver, complaints about the mine foreman. But after about an hour, Marcus heard something that made his blood run cold. "Stranger came through about an hour ago," one miner was saying to another. "Well-dressed fellow with fancy clothes and a smooth way of talking. Said he was looking for 3 people, a man, a woman, and an older fellow. Offered $50 for information." Marcus kept his expression neutral, but his mind was racing. $50 was more than most miners made in a month. If Fairfax was offering that kind of money just for information, it meant he was getting desperate. $50 just for telling him if you'd seen somebody? The second miner asked. What did these people do? Rob a bank? Didn't say, but he seemed mighty anxious to find them. Had 4 or 5 other men with him, all armed like they were expecting trouble. Marcus finished his beer and left the saloon as casually as he could manage. His heart was pounding as he walked toward the hotel restaurant where Catherine was supposed to be waiting. Through the restaurant window, he could see Catherine sitting at a table by herself, trying to look like she was just enjoying a quiet lunch. But Marcus could tell by the way she held herself that she was as nervous as he was. He was about to enter the restaurant when he noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. At a table near the back of the room, partially hidden by shadows, sat a man in expensive clothes who was watching Catherine very carefully. The man was middle-aged with gray hair and cold blue eyes. He wasn't eating and he wasn't reading a newspaper. He was just sitting there, staring at Catherine like a cat watching a mouse. Marcus ducked into the alley beside the hotel and tried to think. If the man was one of Fairfax's people, then Catherine was in immediate danger. But if Marcus went into the restaurant, he might give away his own identity and make things worse. He decided to circle around to the back of the restaurant and see if there was another way to warn Catherine. But as he moved through the alley, he almost ran into Tom Bradley, who was hurrying toward him with a worried expression. "We've got problems," Bradley said quietly. "Big problems. Fairfax and his men are in town, and they're asking questions about us at every business on Main Street." "I know," Marcus said. "There's also a man watching Catherine in the restaurant. I think he's one of them." Bradley cursed under his breath. "The stagecoach doesn't leave for 2 hours. We can't stay hidden that long, not with them searching the whole town. Maybe we should forget about the stagecoach and try to leave on foot," Marcus suggested. "With Catherine's leg? We'd never make it. They'd run us down with horses within an hour." Marcus was trying to think of alternatives when he heard something that chilled him to the bone. From the direction of the main street came the sound of a woman screaming. Both men ran toward the sound, and Marcus's worst fears were confirmed. Through the restaurant window, he could see that the gray-haired man had moved to Catherine's table and was gripping her wrist with one hand while gesturing toward the door with the other. Catherine was trying to pull away, but the man was much stronger than she was. Other people in the restaurant were staring, but no one was moving to help her. "We have to do something," Marcus said, reaching for his pistol. "Wait," Bradley said, grabbing his arm. "If we go in there shooting, we'll have the whole town against us. There's got to be a better way." But even as Bradley spoke, Marcus could see the gray-haired man forcing Catherine to stand up. She was trying to resist, but with her injured leg, she couldn't put up much of a fight. The man was leading her toward the restaurant's back door, probably planning to take her to wherever Fairfax was waiting. Once they had Catherine, the key, and the evidence it would unlock, Marcus and Bradley would be powerless to stop the conspiracy. Marcus looked at Bradley, at the restaurant where Catherine was being kidnapped, and at the busy street full of people who had no idea that the future of the Montana Territory was being decided right in front of them. "I'm sorry," Marcus said to Bradley, "but I can't let them take her." Before Bradley could stop him, Marcus was running toward the restaurant's front door, his hand on his pistol and his heart pounding with fear and determination. He had no plan except to save the woman who had somehow become more important to him than his own life. Behind him, he could hear Bradley cursing and running to catch up. And from somewhere in the distance came the sound of horses approaching fast, which probably meant that Fairfax himself was coming to collect his prize. The next few minutes would determine whether justice would triumph in the Montana Territory, or whether corruption and greed would win another victory in the American West. The crack of Marcus's fist against the gray-haired man's jaw echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot, sending plates crashing to the floor as startled diners dove for cover. The man released Catherine's wrist and staggered backward, his hand reaching for the pistol at his belt. But Marcus was already moving. "Get down!" Marcus shouted to Catherine as he tackled the man before he could draw his weapon. They crashed into a table, sending food and dishes flying as they wrestled for control of the gun. The restaurant erupted in chaos. Women screamed and men shouted as chairs overturned and people scrambled toward the exits. Through the confusion, Marcus could see Catherine trying to stand despite her injured leg, her face pale but determined. The gray-haired man was stronger than Marcus had expected, and he fought with the skill of someone who'd been in many violent situations. He managed to get one hand on his pistol grip and was trying to work it free from its holster when Tom Bradley burst through the restaurant's front door. "Federal agent," Bradley shouted, his badge glinting in the lamplight as he pointed his rifle at the struggling men. "Everyone stay calm." The announcement had an immediate effect. The panicking diners froze in place, and even the gray-haired man stopped fighting for a moment, his eyes going wide with surprise. But that moment of shock was all Marcus needed. He drove his elbow into the man's stomach, causing him to double over in pain, then grabbed the pistol from his holster before he could recover. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded, pressing the gun against the man's chest. The gray-haired man straightened up slowly, his cold blue eyes showing no fear despite his situation. "Name's Jake Crawford. I work for Mr. Fairfax, and you've just made the biggest mistake of your life." "The only mistake I made was not hitting you harder," Marcus said, but Bradley stepped forward before things could escalate further. "Mr. Crawford," Bradley said formally, "you're under arrest for attempted kidnapping and conspiracy to commit federal crimes. You have the right to remain silent." Crawford laughed, a harsh sound that made Marcus's skin crawl. "Federal agent or not, you're all dead men. Fairfax has this whole town surrounded. You think one badge is going to save you from 20 armed men?" Through the restaurant windows, Marcus could see that Crawford wasn't lying. Horsemen were positioning themselves at both ends of the main street, and more were taking cover behind buildings and water troughs. Silver Creek had become a trap, and they were caught in the middle of it. "Catherine," Marcus said quietly, "can you walk?" She nodded, though he could see the pain in her green eyes. "I can manage." Bradley was scanning the street through the window, his expression grim. "Crawford's right about one thing. We're outnumbered and surrounded. But he's wrong about something else." "What's that?" Marcus asked. Bradley smiled, and for the first time since Marcus had met him, the older man looked truly dangerous. "He thinks I came to this town alone." Before Marcus could ask what he meant, the sound of a bugle echoed across Silver Creek from the hills above the town. It was followed by another, then another, until the valley rang with military calls. Crawford's confident expression suddenly changed to one of confusion and growing fear. "What the hell is that?" "That," Bradley said with satisfaction, "is the United States Cavalry. I sent a signal to Fort Ellis yesterday, and it looks like they got my message." Through the windows, Marcus could see Fairfax's men looking around nervously as the bugle calls continued. Some of them were already backing away from their positions, clearly having second thoughts about fighting federal troops. But Fairfax himself appeared in the restaurant doorway, his expensive suit dusty from hard riding and his face twisted with rage. He was holding a rifle, and his pale eyes were fixed on Catherine with deadly intent. "Enough games," Fairfax snarled. "Give me the girl and the key, or I'll kill everyone in this restaurant." The ordinary people who'd been having lunch suddenly found themselves in the middle of a gunfight between federal agents and corrupt businessmen. Marcus could see the terror on their faces as they realized their peaceful day had turned into a matter of life and death. "You're finished, Fairfax," Bradley said, his rifle trained on the lawyer. "My men have evidence of everything you've done. The land theft, the bribes, the murders. It's over." "Nothing's over until I say it's over," Fairfax replied. I've got judges bought, senators in my pocket, and enough money to make this whole problem disappear. All I need is that key. Catherine stepped forward despite her injured leg, her chin raised defiantly. You want the key? Here it is. She pulled the brass key from her dress pocket and held it up where everyone could see it. Fairfax's eyes locked onto it with the intensity of a starving man looking at food. But if you want it, Catherine continued, you'll have to explain to all these people why you murdered my father for it. A murmur went through the crowd of trapped diners. Judge Morrison had been respected throughout the territory, and the suggestion that his death hadn't been natural shocked them. Your father was a fool who didn't understand how the world works, Fairfax said coldly. He thought he could fight progress and win. He was wrong. Progress? Catherine's voice rose with anger. You call stealing land from honest families progress? You call bribing officials and forging documents progress? Marcus could see that Catherine's words were having an effect on the people around them. These were ordinary frontier folks who'd worked hard for everything they owned. The idea that powerful men were stealing land from people like them made them angry. Miss Morrison, said a voice from the crowd. Are you saying that Mr. Fairfax here killed your father? The speaker was a middle-aged woman in a simple dress, probably a miner's wife. Her face was hard with the kind of strength that came from surviving in a difficult land. I'm saying he had my father murdered to prevent him from exposing a conspiracy that reaches all the way to Washington, Catherine replied. And I have proof. Fairfax was looking increasingly desperate as he realized that public opinion was turning against him. Lies, he said. All lies from a hysterical woman who can't accept her father's natural death. But his words rang false, and Marcus could see that the people in the restaurant didn't believe him. The sound of approaching horses was getting louder, which meant the cavalry was getting closer, but Fairfax still had his rifle pointed at the crowd. Last chance, Fairfax said, his voice shaking with rage. Give me the key, or I start shooting innocent people. Catherine looked at Marcus, then at Bradley, then at the frightened faces of the people around them. Marcus could see her making a terrible calculation weighing the value of the evidence against the lives of strangers. All right, she said finally. You can have the key. She started to walk toward Fairfax, limping on her injured leg. Marcus felt his heart stop as he realized what she was planning to do. But then he saw something in her eyes that made him understand. Catherine Morrison was her father's daughter, and she had a plan. Catherine's hand trembled as she held out the brass key, but her voice was steady when she spoke to Fairfax. This key opens safe deposit box number 47 at the Helena Bank, and inside that box is enough evidence to destroy you and everyone working with you. Fairfax reached for the key with greedy fingers, but Catherine pulled it back just out of his reach. The restaurant had fallen completely silent except for the distant sound of cavalry horses getting closer. But before I give this to you, Catherine continued, I want everyone here to know exactly what you've done and why my father had to die. Enough talking, Fairfax snarled, but Marcus could see uncertainty in his pale eyes. The lawyer was beginning to realize that something was wrong, but he couldn't figure out what. My father discovered that you and your partners have stolen over 50,000 acres of land in the Montana Territory, Catherine said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent restaurant. You've forged surveys, bribed territorial officials, and murdered anyone who tried to stop you. The crowd murmured angrily, and Marcus saw several of the men reaching for weapons they carried. These were frontier people who understood that their land was their life, and the idea of it being stolen made them furious. The evidence in that safe deposit box includes bank records showing payments to Territorial Governor Phillips, Land Commissioner Roberts, and at least 6 other officials, Catherine continued. It also includes forged documents bearing their signatures and maps showing the real boundaries of stolen properties. Fairfax was getting more agitated with every word. Stop talking and give me the key. But most importantly, Catherine said, ignoring his demand, it contains a list of federal officials in Washington who are part of this conspiracy. Senators who have been paid to pass laws favoring Eastern business interests over Western settlers. Marcus understood now what Catherine was doing. She was making sure that everyone in the restaurant knew the full scope of the conspiracy, so that even if Fairfax got the key, the truth would still be known. But Fairfax had finally figured out her plan. "You clever little witch," he said, raising his rifle to point it directly at her chest. "You think you can turn these people against me? I own this territory." "Actually," said a new voice from the restaurant's back door, "I think you'll find that the United States government owns this territory." Everyone turned to see a tall man in a blue cavalry uniform stepping into the restaurant. He was followed by 2 soldiers with rifles, and Marcus could hear more troops surrounding the building. "Captain Andrew Wells, Fort Ellis," the officer announced. "Mr. Fairfax, you're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and treason against the United States." Fairfax's face went white, but he kept his rifle pointed at Catherine. "Stay back, or I'll kill her." "No," Catherine said calmly. "You won't." She opened her hand, and instead of the brass key, a simple iron nail fell to the floor with a small clink. "The real key is already on its way to Helena with a trusted messenger," Catherine said, smiling for the first time since Marcus had found her in the forest. "What you've been chasing is just a decoy I made this morning while you were searching the town." Fairfax stared at the nail on the floor, his face twisting with rage and disbelief. "Impossible. You've been with us the whole time." "Not the whole time," Tom Bradley said, stepping forward with his federal badge visible. "While you were having your men search the saloon and the general store, Miss Morrison slipped out the restaurant's back door and gave the real key to the stagecoach driver, along with a letter explaining everything." Marcus felt a surge of admiration for Catherine's courage and cleverness. Even injured and frightened, she'd managed to outthink a man who'd been successfully stealing land for years. "The Helena stage left an hour ago," Bradley continued. "By the time it reaches the territorial capital tomorrow, Marshal Patterson will have everything he needs to arrest every corrupt official in the territory." Fairfax's rifle was shaking in his hands as the reality of his situation sank in. His conspiracy was exposed, his men were surrounded by federal troops, and the evidence that would destroy him was already beyond his reach. "It's over, Fairfax," Captain Wells said quietly. "Put down the rifle." For a moment, Marcus thought the lawyer might surrender. But then Fairfax's face hardened with desperate determination. "If I'm going down," he said, "I'm taking her with me." He started to pull the trigger, but Marcus was already moving. 3 years of living alone in the wilderness had sharpened his reflexes, and he threw himself between Fairfax and Catherine just as the rifle fired. The bullet meant for Catherine slammed into Marcus's shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into a table. Pain exploded through his body, but he could hear Catherine screaming his name, which meant she was alive. The restaurant erupted in chaos as Captain Wells and his soldiers tackled Fairfax, while Tom Bradley rushed to where Marcus lay bleeding on the floor. "How bad is it?" Marcus asked, trying to sit up despite the burning pain in his shoulder. "You'll live," Bradley said, examining the wound. "The bullet went clean through. You're lucky." Catherine was kneeling beside him, tears streaming down her face. "You could have been killed," she said, her voice shaking. "But I wasn't," Marcus said, managing a weak smile. "And neither were you. That's what matters." Through the restaurant windows, Marcus could see cavalry soldiers rounding up Fairfax's men. Some had tried to run when they heard the gunshots, but the troops had been positioned to prevent any escapes. "It's really over?" Catherine asked, still holding Marcus's good hand. "The conspiracy is finished," Bradley confirmed. "With the evidence your father gathered and the testimony of everyone in this restaurant, we'll be able to clean up the territorial government completely." Marcus looked around the restaurant at the ordinary people who'd become unexpected witnesses to history. They were already talking excitedly among themselves, probably creating the stories they'd tell their grandchildren about the day they helped bring down a corrupt conspiracy. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. Catherine looked at him with those remarkable green eyes, and Marcus could see a future in them that he'd never dared to imagine before. "Now," she said, "we rebuild. The territory, the government, our lives. Everything. Together." Marcus asked hopefully. Catherine leaned down and kissed his forehead gently. Together, she said. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky the color of gold and promise. In the distance, Marcus could hear the sound of the Helena stage carrying its precious cargo toward the territorial capital, where justice would finally be served. And in the restaurant in Silver Creek, a wounded hunter and a judge's brave daughter sat together among the broken dishes and overturned chairs, planning a future that neither of them could have imagined when the morning had begun with the simple goal of tracking a deer through the Montana wilderness.